When I was a little girl, I lived in an apartment complex with my mother. The entire complex consists of 2 buildings that sat side by side, less than 100 feet apart, with 4 2-bedroom flats upstairs and 2 downstairs. We lived downhill about 100 yards from a major 5-lane road, but you would never know due to the thick woods that bordered the complex on 3 sides. The last side was an area cut for power lines that ran next to our driveway, with a graveyard directly behind it. It should go without saying that this setup was a recipe for many childish shenanigans as well as creepy encounters. On the front side of the complex and along the power line side were thick blackberry brambles. They weren't quite as thick along the power line area, but in front of the apartment, you couldn't stick your arm in without being torn apart by the thorns, and it was so thick that it was nearly impossible to push through. This is relevant later. I was the only young child that lived there full time, and all the neighbors were, to the best of my knowledge, fond of me. I was active in Girl Scouts, so when it was time to go around to all the neighbors for orders, then when they came in, I would get my little wagon and deliver them. Because my mother knew and trusted all of the neighbors, I would do this myself. The day this happened, I had taken my wagon to the other building to deliver cookies to some of my mother's friends and was walking back. I hadn't meant to stay as long as I did, but they had an aquarium that was fascinating to me. That day, my mother's friend's husband had bought some new fish, so I had spent about 45 minutes helping them pick out names. So when I began to walk back, dusk had fallen. I had walked about 7 steps off their porch when I got a bad feeling. Now, I understand that I'm an empath, and I have learned to listen to my intuition, but back then, I just thought that I had to poo bad. I stopped for a second to settle my stomach and I heard a noise. When I looked to the front of the apartment, where the blackberries were the most thick, initially I couldn't see anything and I wanted to say he had flicked a lighter or something, almost like he was trying to purposely alert me of his presence. The second that I saw him, I froze. He had shoulder-length, stringy black hair, bad skin, and looked like a skeleton. He was so skinny. Knowing what I know now, I imagine that he was probably strung out. I realized when he knew that I saw him because his face split into a wicked, not at all friendly grin. Then he began tearing his way through the blackberry brambles towards me. I began running towards my house while screaming bloody murder as I heard his feet slap the pavement behind me. I got to my steps and my Uncle Mike, who lived next door, flung his door open to see what the heck was going on, but the man had disappeared. I began screaming and crying about the man that had chased me out of the woods, because Mike hadn't seen him. Initially, he had thought that I let my imagination run away with me, but when he looked at the area I said that he had emerged from, there was a clear path and blood from where he had been cut by the thorns. After they took their machete to cut away the brambles and investigate where he had came from, they discovered a small area he had been standing in, with a small pile of cigarette butts like he had stood there waiting for me when he saw me walk across initially. A few weeks later, deeper in the woods, my mother's boyfriend and I discovered a small tent with assorted, inappropriate paraphernalia. No one mentioned the connection, but I was very mature for my age, so when I thought about it, it disturbed me very much. So, disturbing stranger that departed your tent to watch me from the woods. Let's not meet again. I'm a university student now, but this incident happened when I was in 8th grade. When I was around 14, I studied a subject focusing on outdoor pursuits. For our final assessment, 2 teachers took my class on a one-night camp where we would do activities like rock climbing, kayaking, trail walking, and so on. I live in Australia, around an hour from a state forest that was notorious for the backpacker murders. Several bodies had been found and several more remain missing. I'm pretty sure all of the murders were linked to the same killer. Anyway, in the morning, we leave the school and drive out in a bus. When we reach the road that leads to the entrance of the forest, a police car is parked outside. He spoke to the teacher for a moment, but I didn't hear anything and no one else seemed to notice or care. Fast forward a few hours and we've tracked about 20 of us to the camping area somewhere in the middle of a state forest. Some parts are state and some parts are privately owned, I think. While kayaking that afternoon, we noticed a helicopter doing flybys, but again, my classmates never suspected anything. A couple of mates and I were the first to leave the water and helped the teacher with some equipment and started building our own rafts. I was standing off to the side when one of the national park guides walked over to one of the instructors and talked in a hushed, slightly stressed out tone. I remember hearing the instructor say stuff like, "You're kidding," and "I don't believe it." He just looked shocked and taken aback. So at this point, I started connecting the dots, but I didn't say anything to my school friends. Around dusk that night, I got to use the toilet block, which is around 100 meters from the main campsite. As I go in, I remember a guy walking around the other side of the block. I didn't see him very clearly in the diminished light, but he kept glancing around with nervous body language. I couldn't see his face clearly. He wasn't part of our party, and to me he just didn't fit. I didn't think much of it at the time though. Fast forward to the next morning when we got back to the car park. The teacher tells us that a body was found in a dam not far from where we were. They didn't want to tell us so as to not frighten us. We later found out that it was a young guy who was killed with an axe, and the guy who did it was related to the serial killer who hunted in the same area. I don't know if that guy I saw had anything at all to do with the murders, but it freaked me out a lot afterwards. I haven't been camping since. This happened to me when I was 17, around the time when most of my friends were just getting their driver's license. We all had that rush for cars back then, so it was quite common for us to skip school and go for a ride out of town. The city where I live is surrounded by forests and 2 mountains, so we basically had a lot of places to go and chill. One day, my friend was very excited to show us a place that he had found about online, and possibly here on Reddit, for which people said was quite odd. We looked it up and apparently it had a reputation for being a paranormal site. Being the typical group of teens, we collectively agreed to check it out ASAP, including me who more or less believes in spiritual stuff. Going up the mountain, we were listening to the radio until we lost the station to static, which for obvious reasons is what the radio does when you go deep into the woods. This entire experience is happening during a summer night, so we were feeling pretty careless and as excited as a person can be. Having no music to listen to, we started talking and discussing our expectations for this place, with most of us having no expectations at all. Our conversation was suddenly interrupted by the loud static coming from the radio that we had just turned off a few minutes ago. We were all a bit startled, but still nothing out of the ordinary. It happened again a few minutes later. We all looked at the radio and it was still off. We quickly dismissed this as something that radios do for some reason, and again didn't pay much attention. The third time that it happened, the driver hit the brakes and stopped the car. He turned to us and yelled, "Come on, did you hear that? What was that?" Claiming that he had heard a voice this time. None of us heard anything except the static. The driver said that he had had enough and switched the engine off, so there is no possible way for anything including the radio to be working. We all sat there like that for a while in pitch black, for there would be no city lights around us and the forest had covered all other light sources like stars and so on. You couldn't distinguish a night sky, that's how dark it was. The light indicating the radio turned down and soon, the static came again. I could tell that we were all feeling a bit anxious by then. Through the static came a female voice singing, and it was very silent. For a second, it got louder and then fell back to silent again and then vanished. But even weirder, the static vanished too. Once we switched the car back on and turned the headlights on too, we observed what seemed to be smudges of fingers all across the windshield. We didn't turn the car around immediately, but I could tell that we all just wanted to leave. We stopped further up on the hill, took some pictures of the Milky Way, and went home afterward. Ever since we speculate about what the heck happened to the radio in the windshield that night. My friends went 2 more times without me to the same place, recording the same, including feeling a small push once the car was off. What do you guys think? I believe there are many logical explanations, but considering the fact that I'm somewhat of a person who believes in such stuff, and I had an adrenaline rush that night, it's hard for me to grasp something rational. I was 18 at the time. One evening, me and my 2 friends, Mike and Paul, decided to go camping. Well, camping maybe isn't the right word, since we didn't intend to spend the night, only to chill and have some fun around the campfire for a while. The plan was simple. Head out, build a campfire, drink a few bottles of wine, eat something, and head back home for a good night's sleep. We met at my house when it was still sunny outside. We got ready and we headed out. Our destination was an old abandoned quarry in the middle of the woods, which was maybe 40 minutes away from my house. Even though the quarry has a tragic and frankly creepy history, it's a popular place for such occasions. When we got there, the sky was already colored red as the sun slowly sank behind the hills. We quickly gathered all the firewood that we could, so we wouldn't have to look for it later. As the darkness fell and absorbed all of our surroundings into impenetrable blackness, we had already managed to get the fire going. We were in a great mood and we were getting ready for our first toast. And that's when we realized that we had made a horrible mistake. We forgot the corkscrew. We were trying to open the wine without it, but we quickly gave up, because the bottles were quite expensive, and we didn't want to damage them. At this point, it was clear that one of us would have to sacrifice themselves and jog back to retrieve the corkscrew. After a bit of haggling, I volunteered. However, I had 2 conditions. Firstly, they would give me a hatchet in case something went wrong along the way. And secondly, no pranks when I got back. Mike and Paul agreed without hesitation. They shoved a hatchet into my one hand and a flashlight to the other, and sent me on my way. As I was jogging through the forest, I heard a noise resembling a wild boar. Suddenly, I remembered a warning I received from an older hunter a few days ago. He said that this time of year, boars were getting dangerous, especially at night. I was a bit nervous, but luckily, I managed to survive with no harm. I arrived safely to my house, much to my surprise of my mom, who didn't expect me back so early. I explained the whole deal, which she just laughed. I grabbed the corkscrew and was back on my way. Not wanting to experience an unpleasant boar encounter, I chose another, slightly longer path, this time through an open field. After a while, I got to our spot. It was a small clearing, surrounded on one side by massive rocks, maybe 70 meters tall, and on the other side by thick forest. Somewhere in the middle of the clearing was our campfire. When I approached it, I realized that there wasn't anybody, although our backpacks were still on the ground and the fire was burning bright. Great. We specifically agreed that there would be no pranks when I got back. Those guys think that they're funny, I thought to myself. I resignedly sat down near the fire while facing the woods. That's the only place where those 2 guys could have hidden, I thought. I was really tired and all I could think about was the taste of that exquisite Pinot Noir we had brought with us. I really wasn't in the mood for their games and I was getting quite mad. And that's when I heard a snapping of twigs and rustling of leaves from the edge of the forest, maybe 30 meters from where I was sitting. The sound was rhythmical, and it was undoubtedly the sound of somebody walking. I aimed my flashlight to the spot where sounds were coming from. Between the trees, I spotted a tall person wearing a dark hoodie. As I shined my flashlight on him, he stopped walking, turned to me, and just kept staring motionlessly. Even though he was directly facing me, I couldn't really see his face. I shouted, "Paul, you fatso! I know you're trying to scare me. We agreed on something, so stop messing around and come out." As I finished, the hooded figure just turned around and walked deeper into the woods. Exactly at that time, my phone started ringing. Hastily, I took it out of my pocket. It was Mike. I took the call and started barking at him. "Really funny, guys. I thought we agreed on something." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about you trying to mess with me. I clearly saw you, and now you can come out." Mike, as if frozen for a minute. For what seemed like an eternity, all I could hear was his heavy breathing and Paul mumbling something in the background. When he finally snapped back to reality, he just said, "Dude, we're at your house. We heard some footsteps, and at first we thought you were just trying to mess with us. But then we got scared and decided to look after you. I forgot the phone at your house, so we couldn't even give you a call. Just get the heck out of there, and we'll come back for our stuff together." "BS. That's just another one of your funny pranks, and I'm not buying it." "Hold on a second." For a while, all I could hear was some incoherent mumbling. "Hey, what's going on?" asked the voice of my mom coming from the phone. My head suddenly spun and my heart skipped a beat as I realized that they weren't kidding. Suddenly, a freezing wave of fear ran through my body. However, I managed to convince Mom that everything was just fine, and that she didn't need to worry. She gave the phone back to Mike. "Just leave everything and come back. We're heading out now. We'll meet you halfway there." "I'm not going anywhere alone again. You better get your butts here and do it quick. I'm waiting for you." "But..." I hung up. I didn't wish to make any more noise than I already did. I quickly turned off my flashlight and started to back off from the light of the fire. I moved all the way to the huge wall of rocks. I figured that if I had my bag covered by the rocks, I could eliminate one of the possible ways that unwanted visitors could approach me. I was standing there in a complete darkness, trying not to make a sound while tightly clutching my hatchet, which would be for the next half an hour my best friend. I had to constantly convince myself not to curl into a ball in fear. Even my own body started to betray me. As my hearing got worse due to my savagely beating heart, I was trying to calm myself. But then again, in worst case scenario, every little bit of adrenaline would help. After what seemed like an eternity, I spotted 2 weak light beams coming from the forest. I heard Paul shout my name. I'd never been so relieved. I finally ran out from my hiding to greet my 2 friends. For quite some time, we were just standing there, laughing like maniacs from relief. We were even getting a bit cocky, and we thought about staying. After all, there was just one supposedly creep lurking between the trees, and there were 3 of us. It's funny. Just minutes earlier, I was crapping myself with fear, and now I was suddenly full of tough macho thinking, what could possibly happen? In the end, healthy judgments got the better of us and we decided to leave. We packed our things, put out the fire, and got out. We took our bottles of wine to enjoy somewhere else, somewhere where it's nice and brightly lit.